Hello and welcome to another TFHB React video. Today we're taking a closer look at one of our favourite YouTube channels, Oversimplified. Now they do amazing videos looking at the famous wars and famous revolutions in history, but they've also done a mini war video on the football war of 1969. We're really looking forward to watching this one. It's the match, a very famous game between Honduras and El Salvador. We've written about it twice in our books. We have it in this one, Football's 50 Most Important Moments, and also the history of football in 90 minutes. You can get hold of those using the links in the description below, and you can also follow and subscribe to Oversimplified as well, because there's a link to their channel too. Shall we get started?
Let's crack on.
Yeah, okay.
Quick, you have 2 seconds to name these two countries. You're wrong, unless you got it right. Then good job. They are, of course, Honduras and El Salvador. One thing these two countries have in common is being fanatic about football. Or if you're a freedom-loving patriot, soccer. But do they love it so much they would go to war over it? You bet they would, and that is no bueno.
Right, stop there. So we got a bit of intel straight away. Two countries that are obsessed with football, pretty common around the world.
Yes.
You could probably see this happen in a lot of places. We can just think straight away of England and Wales.
Yeah.
But there we go. Two neighbours, El Salvador and Honduras. But I'm sure there must be more to it than just football.
If you look at these two countries, you might notice one major difference, and that is that this one is a lot bigger than this one. However, this one had a larger population than this one, made up mostly of farmers, and there wasn't enough land for them to live and work on. So they started moving from El Salvador to Honduras in search of land, and by the 1960s, a huge number of illegal immigrants had crossed over the border from El Salvador. Meanwhile, in Honduras, it's 1963, and this guy has just staged a military coup to prevent the rise of communism, and is now the military leader of the country.
Common theme, Cold War, 1960s. You get a lot of that going on. Military coups, often backed by the USA, particularly if they are capitalist.
It's a period of time called the Red Scare, isn't it?
Yeah,
Terrified of communism, terrified of it, and so the USA would back people willing
And
to stop it.
they thought about the domino effect, didn't they? You know, if Honduras is communist, then El Salvador will become communist, then Mexico will become communist, and then it's on the border with America. And there was that massive scare going on. Of course, you know, if the nation was communist, then they'd have the USSR backing them as well. And even though, you know, USA and USSR never engaged in direct conflict, they did through other countries, Vietnam, Korea. And as we can see, even here in Honduras, there is a bit of dodginess going on, shall we say.
He immediately began harassing the peasants' unions and other left-wing groups, but he's a little insecure about the legitimacy of his leadership. So he holds an election and wins, but then the opposing party says, hey man, that election was clearly corrupt and fraudulent, and also you've been bribed by the rich American banana companies who are taking all of our bananas tax-free, and now our economy is in ruins. And everyone started to get mad at him. Now if you ever find yourself the barely legitimate military leader of a corrupt Central American country, and you start getting into hot water, here's a bit of advice that has been tried and tested throughout the centuries. Blame something else. So he blamed the Salvadoran immigrants for stealing all the land and all the jobs and ruining Honduras. The immigrants found themselves under attack by the hostile locals. Egged on by the rich American banana companies who wanted all the bananas to themselves, the Honduran government began evicting Salvadoran immigrants who had been living on the land for generations and started sending them back to El Salvador. The Salvadoran elite were furious and protested, citing moral reasons, but in reality, they were just getting a little too crowded. So tensions were about as high as they could be, but then... It's the 1970 World Cup qualifiers, and both countries finished top of their qualifying team.
Dutch Guyana. It says, was Dutch Guyana still a country? Yes, they say they were. And then the third one, he hasn't even got a team in there. I don't know, Guatemala or something. So I think what I was trying to say is, you know, the level of football worry wasn't that high at the time in Central America. But these two teams have managed to get to the top of the group, which means they're going to have to play against each other. At the time, the World Cup was heavily European and South American, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
The 66 World Cup, just 4 years before, had no African teams involved. There was an African boycott, and there was actually also an Asian boycott as well of that tournament. However, North Korea, you know, said whatever to the boycott, we'll go anyway, and they ended up beating Italy in it somehow. So at the time, yeah, this is quite a big thing, having a chance for another Central American team to qualify. Usually Mexico didn't they? And obviously the Mexico were hosting this World Cup. So there was a chance then for another team to get in there. But let's see what happens in this playoff.
So it was now time for them to play against each other in a series of matches. The first match took place in Honduras. The night before the game, Hondurans gathered outside the Salvadoran team's hotel, making noise and taunting them. The next day, Honduras defeated the exhausted Salvadorans with a late 90th minute goal. After the match, a young Salvadoran fan, unable to bear her country's defeat, shot herself. Disturbingly, the Salvadoran government glorified the incident and made her into a national hero. And at the next game, fans brought pictures of her to the stadium. Emotions were running high as the next match took place in El Salvador, and this time the tables were turned. The Hondurans had to endure a sleepless night in their hotel, and the next day, before the match started, instead of the Honduran flag, the Salvadorans raised a dirty rag. So great job at reducing...
That's not going to go down well, is it?
Inflammatory.
Inflammatory, yeah. Can you imagine... Obviously, the Six Nations going on at the moment in the rugby. Can you imagine Wales playing against England at Twickenham and then the English just raising a dirty rag to the Welsh flag? It would probably end up being a full-on, I don't know, riots would happen, wouldn't they?
But again, it shows that how often football in its history has been politicised.
Yeah.
Constantly, isn't it? Even up to the modern day with Marcus Rashford doing COVID and wanting to pay towards... young people and having their food still, and that being on a whole political point and to stay out of it. Football and politics are constantly mixing, right back from the birth of FIFA and things to do with paying footballers and maximum wage and things like that, all through 74, East versus West Germany. This is another occasion of it where throughout, particularly at World Cups, where countries who don't operate alongside each other normally on friendly terms are forced to play each other.
Yeah,
by a draw.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Wales, England played each other in the last World Cup, didn't they? You also have things like America, Iran in '98 was a very heated contest. You do get it. I mean, some nations they can't play each other. I know at the moment Russia can't play Ukraine.
Yeah.
But in the World Cup, imagine both teams qualify in 2026.
Yeah.
And they have to. What happens if they play in the final? Yeah, it's right.
Or dictators using sport in another way, isn't it?
Sports.
1934, in particular, was the first one with Mussolini.
Yeah.
It happens again in Argentina in '78. So it's something that happens regularly.
Qatar.
Yeah.
There we go. Right, carry on.
Tensions, El Salvador won decisively over the exhausted Hondurans, while spectators battled in the stands. Team Honduras fled home in a bulletproof bus with rocks being thrown at them, and the Honduran coach reportedly told his players that they were lucky they lost. In response to the defeat, Hondurans began terrorizing the Salvadoran settlers even more, in some cases reportedly throwing them off their land and burning down their homes, and the immigrants began fleeing back to El Salvador. The final game in Mexico would decide who went to the World Cup. It was close, but El Salvador came out victorious.
So, I mean, what this video is not showing properly is I think it was meant to just be two legs. It was meant to be like it would normally be. However, back in 1969 when this game actually took place, the aggregate system is a little bit different in this particular qualification campaign. And rather than it being... So, obviously El Salvador won the second game 3-0. So it was 3-1 aggregate.
But it was one win each.
But it was seen as one win each. So we need another game to decide who's the overall winner. So even though these days El Salvador would have qualified straight away as 3-1 winners, this time they need a third game in a neutral country. It's in Mexico. And we can see it's 2-2 so far.
Knocking Honduras out of the tournament. The atmosphere is riotous, literally, and back in Honduras, attacks on the Salvadoran immigrants further increased. This was too much for El Salvador to bear. With its people under attack and an unmanageable refugee crisis on its hands, El Salvador severed all diplomatic ties with Honduras and declared war. The football war is also known as the 100 Hours War, because that's how long it lasted, making it one of the shortest wars in history. El Salvador started by carrying out air raids on strategic locations within Honduras, including Toncontin International Airport, which prevented the Honduran Air Force from getting into the sky. Then, with their superior army, they began an invasion along two major roads, complete with light tanks and infantry. Their advance was rapid, and they were quickly approaching the Honduran capital. Then the Organization of American States met in a bit of a panic and unanimously agreed that war between El Salvador and Honduras was a bad thing and probably shouldn't continue. So they went to El Salvador and said, "Can you please stop invading?" And El Salvador declared, "Not until they stop being jerks," and so the war went on. the Honduran Air Force finally got into the sky, and with aid from neighboring Nicaragua, they successfully carried out air raids on Salvadoran air bases and oil facilities, crippling the Salvadoran supply line and stopping their advance dead. Caught in a bit of a stalemate, the situation was no longer advantageous to El Salvador, so when the Organization of American States once again asked them to stop and agreed to ensure the safety of the Salvadoran immigrants, El Salvador relented, and a ceasefire was organized on the 18th of July. Then the OAS said, "Can you now please withdraw your troops from Honduras? No, please, no, please, no, please, no. Do it or we'll sanction you."
Okay.
You know what? Just for you, I'll do it. So El Salvador pulled its troops out of Honduras on the 2nd of August, and with casualties in the thousands...
Look at that. 6,000 people killed, 15,000 injured for absolutely nothing, really, because the borders are the same. Obviously, they've guaranteed the safety of the immigrants in Honduras, which is a big thing. But, 6,000 people killed, is that, was it worth it? But obviously it's called a football war. It's not because of the football.
Yeah.
It's obviously long-standing tensions between the two sides, but the football is that spark.
It's the trigger, and every war needs a trigger, like you did in the First World War.
Yeah.
With an assassination of a seemingly unimportant in terms of world history figure.
Yeah.
Started a whole First World War.
Mm-hmm.
This sparked by a football match.
Yeah, there we go. And I mean, can you imagine it happening now?
No, I can't. But then the world is in a sad state. So possibly.
Trying to think what countries it might happen. Obviously, last week actually USA had Iran, didn't they, as well? The group, and it was okay. But yeah, those kind of games, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The war was over. The economies of both nations were damaged by the war, and El Salvador didn't have the capability to take care of all the returning immigrants, a crisis that eventually helped cause a civil war. The war left behind land and border disputes, some of which are still a cause of tension to this day. El Salvador went on to play in the World Cup, but lost every match they played and didn't make it past the group stage. So in the end, nobody achieved anything, and there were no winners. Except for this guy.
So the only winners in the end was America and the banana companies who exploited them. Right, there we go. Our first react to an oversimplified video, probably the only one because it's the only football one that they have. Fantastic video.
Yeah.
And did you learn a lot there?
Yeah, I did. I did learn a lot, and they are great oversimplified actually for just short snippets of history. Great.
I mean, they're definitely longer videos they do now, but that one, yeah, fantastic. Right, there we go. Hope you enjoyed our react to Oversimplified Football War. If you liked it, please let us know if there's any other videos you want us to react to. There don't have to be football matches. They can be like this one. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you very much.